Hey everyone, factoring into today's video, it's JMA Friday today, so having a look at the weather for the coming month today. It's a long range look ahead, and it'll be taking us through towards the end of March, actually, through to around the 28th of March, so virtually covering the whole of the coming month. I think I'll be seeing a lot of anticyclonic influences through March. Not sure it's going to necessarily be that warm at times. It probably will be close to average in terms of the temperatures. Not sure about that yet, but certainly indications from a lot of long-range models are that we could see some anti-cyclonic influences go through most of the month. So it could potentially be a very dry month indeed. Now, before I get on with that, just say about the ads. There's links to articles, most pages at gasoffice.com. Have browse through widgets. Any articles that you're interested in, please click through. You have to go for read those articles, and thanks very much for doing that. Right, let's start off with the 500 millibar height anomalies from the JMA, the Japanese model. These are broken down into weekly periods. The first week period takes us from the 27th today. I'm doing a video to the 6th of March. Blue is extrapolating to low pressure, and orange, red, yellow is extrapolating to high pressure. So we've got quite clearly a trough of low pressure up to the northwest. Just say the British Isles is just there. So we've got quite clearly a trough of low pressure to the northwest around Greenland and Iceland, a ridge down to the south across Spain and Portugal, and also extending out into the Atlantic. Quite a strong westerly jet stream coming across the Atlantic as well. So it's unsettled week coming up. There will be showers, longer spells of rain coming through. Very similar to what we've had through much of this winter, actually. Relatively cool air coming out of sort of Newfoundland, that part of Canada, and coming across the Atlantic. Moderated, of course, but still pretty cool at times. And yeah, it's just a continuation of what we've seen through much of the winter. Relatively unsettled and quite cool. Now, signs of a change as we go through to the next weekly period. This takes us from the 7th of March through to the 14th of March, and then quite evidently big changes taking place. So we've got this big area of orange sitting over top of the country then, so a big ridge of high pressure is taking over. Trough in the Atlantic is becoming stuck around Greenland and Newfoundland. The jet stream is going like that, rising around the ridge, sitting over the top of the country. Now, the exact wind direction with this is going to be very critical. If the air mass is coming from an east to northeasterly type direction, then it's going to be relatively cool. In fact, it'll be cold still at this time of year. Probably not too bad by day, near normal temperatures by day with sunshine, but cold and frosty at night. But if the air mass happens to be coming more from an Atlantic influence, or so from the south, southwest, that type direction, then it's going to be a taste of spring. But either way, whatever the temperatures are doing with that, it's going to be very dry. The high pressure really is in there dominating the weather. And look at this as we go through to the final 2-week period, taking us from the 14th to the 28th of March. The yellow colours are still in there almost across the country. So the idea is that high pressure continues really into the second half of the month. Going to keep it mainly dry if that comes off. And with the position of the high pressure, we're probably bringing in sort of southerly, southeasterly type flow. So overall, as we go through March, the scene is probably going to be on that sort of setup anyway, for the temperatures to begin to lift up more and more, the sun getting stronger by the day, of course, as we go through March. So you would expect on that sort of setup by the end of March, it could be really quite mild, pleasant and spring-like. So lots of dry weather coming up from the JMA in March, if that's correct. The CFS V2 is very similar with this, as it often is now. Actually, I've been doing this for quite some time now, comparing these weekly CFS anomalies to the JMA, and they do very often come out with very similar ideas. So let's just quickly run through this. This is the 26th of February to the 4th of March, and the idea for this week, and this is the more unsettled week from the JMA. So we've got the trough of low pressure around Greenland and Iceland, the ridge down to the southwest of the country around Spain and Portugal, and the flow, the jet stream is going like that. So it excuse me, it is quite unsettled through that weekly period. The coming week relatively cool as well. The air mass is coming out of Canada, so it is moderated by the Atlantic, of course, but it's relatively cool and quite unsettled. Most unsettled, of course, in the north and the west, less so in the south-southeast. But this is the period when the JMA is seeing that change to much more settled conditions. This is the 5th to the 11th of March, and look at this, the above average heights are in there across the country. Then so a big change takes place at some point through the first week and on into the second week. High pressure takes over. This has an extending back up to high pressure city to the northeast of the country as well. Again, the exact air mass with this is critical. I think this is probably relatively cool air actually coming around this ridge, so I would suspect it's relatively chilly, but a lot of dry weather, and there would be frost at night and in the sunshine by day. Probably not feeling too bad, but I'm not sure with the exact position of that ridge that that's a particularly warm scenario. But this does turn milder as we go through to the 12th to the 18th. Then the high pressure, the heights more centred across central parts of Europe, and the upshot of that is that we start to get more of a southerly southwesterly type influence through to the middle of the month, so that will be lifting the temperatures up as well. The low pressures around Greenland and Iceland, lots of dry weather continuing through that, and as I say, temperatures through the middle part of the month probably starting to turn a little bit milder, and that's really how we keep as we go through to the 19th to the 25th of March, week 4. We've got the low pressure here, the trough in the Atlantic around Greenland, Iceland. The ridge is out to the east and the northeast. The flow is going like that. So again, southerly, southwesterly type influences. We may be turning a little bit more unsettled through that period as well. The signs are there that the ridge is beginning to slip further east, starting to allow this trough to become more influential from the northwest. So it probably turns a little bit more unsettled in the second half of the month on that scenario. But down in the southeast, still plenty of dry weather, but turning more unsettled from the north and the northwest. Now, the overall temperature for the coming few weeks, this is from the CFS V2 model at the website weatherweb.net. This is the graph for Birmingham. We see that it's actually seeing some quite chilly weather really through the first half of the month. Maybe surprisingly cool. This is the 1st of March just here, and on that sort of sense, I would have expected this to be a little bit milder than this, but overall it's relatively cool until we get through into the final week, and then we see a big push up in the temperatures. This is 18 Celsius just here, and we're up there as we get through towards the last week or so of March. It turns properly spring-like then. In fact, almost a little bit of a burst of early summer warmth. 80 Celsius about where you expect temperatures to be in June. So we do get some warmth right at the end of the month, but overall, actually the temperature forecast for Birmingham isn't coming out that warm for most of March. It's coming out relatively cool, and particularly here around the 11th to the 16th, actually quite cold there. I'm quite surprised at that. I would expect that to be a little bit milder than that. But certainly in terms of the temperatures, as I say, it's a difficult one to call in terms of the temperatures from these longer range models. High pressure in March can be spring-like if it's exactly the right position. It can deliver quite warm temperatures, but if you get any sort of continental influence, particularly from the northeast or the northeast, going to be quite cold still in March. We're not seeing evidence of proper northern blocking, so we're not looking at really cold conditions, but it can be quite chilly still in March if the high pressure is just in the wrong position. And overall, the CFS V2 not really seeing anything particularly mild or warm until we get through to the final week of the month. The Beijing Climate Centre, all very similar with these ideas. These are 10-day 500 millibar heights over the coming 10 days from the 26th of March to the 26th of February, I should say, to the 7th of March. So the low pressure up to the northwest, the high pressure down to the southwest, the jet stream coming through across the country like that. So it's a relatively unsettled end to February and start to March. But as we get through to the next 10-day period, going from the 8th to the 17th of March, the heights build in, it turns mostly dry and settled, high pressure really taking over the pattern with that one. So all very much in agreement with these longer range models for high pressure to really take over through March, and that goes on then for the 10-day period from the 8th to the 27th. The above average heights are in across the UK and in the Atlantic as well, so lots of dry weather coming up. Again, wind flow is critical as to whether this is mild or relatively cool, and even going out to the end of March, start of April, the Beijing Climate Centre is seeing that area of above average heights continue, so a prolonged period there of very high pressure. Now, that's probably over the top. It's probably got itself stuck in a rut, as these long-range models tend to do, particularly with high pressure. They have a job to break out of it. I would suspect by the time we get through to April, we will be seeing signs of a change. But yeah, the Beijing Climate Centre, the JMA and the CFSV2 all go for this idea of high pressure building in. Now, just very quick to say about the easterly. I've been talking about the chance of an easterly coming up sort of the 7th, 8th of March, the first weekend of March, and not really seeing signs of that now. It looks like the chance of that is going away. I said yesterday the difficulty with this is always to get into that easterly in the first place, and it doesn't look like we're going to be able to pull off getting into that pattern. So just quickly leave you with these charts. It's GFS for Wednesday, bring down this cold order wind. It'll be a cold start next week, and there could be some snow around. May update snow watch this evening, so keep an eye out for that. There could be some snow around for the start of next week. We go into the middle of next week, we're in this northerly wind, and then the high pressure builds in. This is the point where the models a couple of days ago were wanting to send this high pressure up to Scandinavia, but it doesn't look like we're going to pull it off. So high pressure just collapses really and allows the low pressure from the Atlantic to push back through as we go through to the end of next week. And by Saturday, Sunday, instead of being in an easterly, we're in a pretty mild west to southwesterly flow. And then the high pressure builds up from the south. And that could be quite spring-like actually by the time you go through to day 10, Monday the 9th. High pressure sitting just to the south over northern parts of France, bringing up the air from the Azores. So you could get temperatures up to 13, 14, 15 degrees potentially with that, probably over the top. But it's still the idea, anyway, that we're not bringing in that easterly. The ECMWF, very similar. So we've got the northerly through to middle next week. It'll be cold through most of next week. We'll have a cold week. Heights try to ridge up towards Scandinavia, but the Atlantic is really too buoyant to allow it to happen. So the westerlies coming around the top of the high pressure, forcing their way into Scandinavia, not allowing that ridge to form. We end up by day 10, Monday the 9th, and we're under high pressure. So it's very similar, this actually, to what we're looking at with the longer range models. High pressure building through the country, going off in towards the continent as well. And as I say, wind direction with this is very critical. So on this setup, which is high pressure sitting just to the south from the GFS, that's a very mild spring-like pattern on Monday the 9th. But this one from the ECMWF, although it's not an easterly, but with high pressure ridging through the country like this and extending to the east, that's pretty cold. It's a pretty cold pattern, particularly at night. There'd be some hard frost with that, and even by day, probably not that mild as well. And that's what I was talking about with those longer range charts, that the exact wind direction is very critical in March as to whether you get an early burst of spring or whether you're still reflecting a winter pattern. You see that difference very clearly between the GFS and the ECMWF, but it doesn't look like we're going to pull off that cold easterly wind this time, and that's been the case throughout the winter actually. We've never really had an easterly this winter. That's why the south and southeast have done so poorly for snow through the winter, because we haven't brought in those bitterly cold winds from Russia. But the overall signal for the month ahead for March is really for high pressure to be dominant. So we're going to have quite a dry month of it, and no doubt there will be some pleasant weather in there as well. Right, it's the weekend forecast tomorrow, so come back for that. And thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you found it interesting and informative. The full forecast for March, the official Gazwo's forecast for March, will probably be on Monday. I'm sure it'll reflect a lot of what we've been looking at today. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out Snow Watch this evening. Comes some snow early next week. Right, that's it, I'm done. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.